Hello and welcome to the First and 10 podcast. I'm your host, Patrick Feltz, here in Indianapolis, Indiana, recording this on the evening of Monday, July 26th, 2021. Just about a month to go until college football season. And while today we were originally planning on beginning our season preview series, which we will begin very soon, we promise, instead, we've got some breaking news to address. Not really breaking anymore. It was breaking a few days ago, but the story is still developing. That's the point. This is a developing story that is changing the course of college football history as we speak. Texas and Oklahoma today officially notified the Big 12 of their intentions to leave following the 2025 season, the expiration date of the Big 12's current TV contract. But maybe they leave sooner, maybe they leave later. Who knows? But moral of the story is Texas and Oklahoma went out of the Big 12. They plan on leaving, and they're going to ask the SEC to join. And it sounds like they're going to be in the SEC. And the ramifications of this expand not just to the Southeastern Conference, to the Big 12, and to the University of Texas and the University of Oklahoma, but to the entirety of college football and really American academia as a whole. This is going to have gigantic ramifications on collegiate athletics. And joining me to break it all down is Reid Murray. What's going on, Reid?
Not too much. Happy to be back on the First and 10. Obviously it's kind of unfortunate we got to push our season previews back, but this is a huge topic that's quite important to the both of us. The idea of conferences and college football and preserving the game we love. So definitely something that we have to talk about on this show. And I'm just excited to be back on.
Now, it's hard to think of a more eventful offseason in college football history than the one we're living through right now, the 2021 offseason. I mean, just off the top of my head, what have we had? Players can get paid now. The NCAA football video games are back. Super conference. Well, number one, Texas and Oklahoma leaving the Big 12 or saying they're going to leave the Big 12 and potentially creating super conferences. The college football playoff being expanded to 12 teams. Can't believe I almost forgot that. Interconference transfer rules pretty much being completely done away with, including the one-time transfer rule. That's another thing, that players can just kind of transfer whenever they want and play immediately. And another thing is that seniors can all stay an extra year. I mean, these are all things that are just completely unheard of in the history of college football. Like, this is by far, in my mind, the most eventful single offseason of all time, with serious changes that are going to change the face of the sport forever. Some for better, some maybe for worse. I guess a lot of it does remain to be seen. We are still living through it right now. But regardless of any of that, all we know is that nothing is going to be the same after the 2021 offseason.
Yeah, I mean, it's like you said, it is hard to think of a time when there was more going on in the offseason. And I think it's exciting, a lot of it. I love the name, image, and likeness stuff. I love playoff expansion. But yeah, the idea of super conferences, certainly a controversial topic. And I'm excited to get into it.
Yeah, so basically the gist of it, if you've been living under a rock, you haven't been following the news, I envy you a little bit because it's been a little soul-sucking at times. But Texas and Oklahoma, like we said, are planning on leaving the Big 12 conference as soon as 2025, or I guess as late as 2025. It could happen as soon as, I guess, tomorrow. Theoretically speaking, it won't happen tomorrow, but theoretically speaking, it could if the money was right. That's what it's all about at the end of the day. But once the TV rights expire in 2025, that is the time, at least, at which they currently plan to exit the Big 12 conference and join the Southeastern Conference, the SEC. And with that, there have been rumors and rumblings. A lot of it I do not trust, about how the SEC is looking to build a super conference of sorts and, take a bunch of other teams from other conferences. There was a guy who is, I don't trust this. Please do not say I'm not reporting this. I don't trust this. There's a guy who I think works for Barstool. Kind of tells you all you need. No, but who said something along the lines of the SEC is trying to add Michigan and Ohio State and Clemson and Florida State to build the ultimate super conference or something. Like,
Yeah, the exact tweet here from Jack McGuire at JackMaxCFB says SEC has been in serious contact with Ohio State, Michigan, Clemson, and Florida State. Not clear if this will materialize, but they have their eyes on a true 20-team mega conference. OU and Texas, just the start. # Scoop City.
I don't buy it. I don't buy it for a second. I'm sure they called those teams and said, "Do you want to join?" And I think they hung up the phone. Michigan and Ohio State in particular. Number one, Clemson and Florida State. The reason they are in the SEC, and the reason Clemson, the reason Bobby Bowden, when he had the choice, when Florida State was an independent and they were joining a conference, he chose to join the SEC over the AC or the ACC over the SEC specifically because they would have an easier road to winning more games and more national championships. And that's worked out. Florida State's won multiple national championships since they made that move. But Clemson, I think, kind of sees it the same way right now. By being in the ACC, they kind of have a punch your own ticket to the playoff every single year, the way the playoffs currently constructed, at least. And I think if the sport were to remain relatively the same and things like super conferences beyond Texas and Oklahoma joining the SEC didn't come into fruition, I think that Clemson would still pretty much have their automatic ticket to the playoff every year. But Michigan and Ohio State's the interesting case. I don't think anybody at these schools would ever consider joining the Southeastern Conference and joining the SEC, joining a mega conference, even if it would be better from a football standpoint, because from an academic standpoint, this would be terrible for those universities. And you have to remember that at the beginning of the day, these are universities, these are academic institutions. And I know a lot of people are thinking, oh, but football's the moneymaker. Football makes all the money, so football can make all the decisions. Not in the Big Ten, it doesn't. Maybe it does in the SEC, maybe it does at Alabama, maybe it does at LSU. It doesn't at Ohio State or Michigan. The Big Ten Academic Alliance, which is the research coalition of all the Big Ten universities, makes more money than Big Ten football, than Big Ten athletics. That is the Big Ten's main focus, is academics, which is why the Big Ten has their AAU requirements, which is the Alliance of American Universities, for all their new joinees, the teams who join the conference. Basically, they have to meet a certain criteria of university, of research and all that. So maybe from a football standpoint, at some point it would make sense. But number one, from a football standpoint, I don't think it would make sense for Ohio State or Michigan, because these two schools take so much pride in being from the Big Ten. And, while they may hate each other or hate other Big Ten teams, at the end of the day, they're proud to be from the Big Ten. And I could never, ever, 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 ever see them outside of it. Texas and Oklahoma, they aren't tied to the Big 12. The Big 12 didn't even exist until 30 years ago. And they outgrew the Big 12. Those two teams were carrying the Big 12 all by themselves from a revenue standpoint, because just look at the revenue sharing. While it was equal, it wasn't equal in who was making the revenue. In the Big 10, while Ohio State might make the most money or generate the most revenue, it's not like everybody else is kind of freeloading off of Ohio State and Michigan and Penn State. Everybody kind of does carry their weight in the Big 10. And that's a big deal from that standpoint. But academics, tradition, and really just pride for their conference, pride for their universities, pride for their teams, and pride and reverence for the traditions of their proud football teams. I could never see this coming into fruition. And honestly, if it did, which I don't think it will, and I don't even think it'll even come close to happening, it would be a truly sad day for the sport. But I don't think that's going to be a reality we live in. I think Texas and Oklahoma are all but set to the SEC. Michigan and Ohio State aren't going anywhere. I can guarantee it. Maybe not guarantee. I don't have insider information, but that won't happen. It just won't. Like, if you know the sport, like me and you know the sport, Reid, and like many of our listeners know the sport, that's unthinkable, Yeah,
and to follow up on some of that Texas, Oklahoma, and SEC news, there's some more news being broken. This was 2 days ago from Graham Coffey, who on Twitter is at Dog Out West. That's spelled DAWG. It says text from an SEC source.
Reid. Is this guy verified?
He is not, but he does cover UGA football, and he does write for Dog Sports, SB Nation's home for the Georgia Bulldogs, which is verified. Okay. So I don't believe he would just be tweeting things willy-nilly like this. It says text from an SEC source with knowledge of the inner workings of the league office. Quote, a couple more dominoes fall and we're in a situation where the SEC could become its own division. More teams have reached out than what's being reported, 20 to 24 within the realm of possibility. He also reports that Texas and Oklahoma are eyeing a 2022 entrance to the SEC. So definitely some interesting things going on in the SEC. But with that, I think I agree with you about Ohio State and Michigan. I can see Clemson and Florida State joining the SEC.
I
because
don't
quite
see.
honestly,
I don't
they're
know.
carrying the ACC, and they're also
But
geographically it makes sense for them.
but
But
are they? Think about it. The ACC, well, football is the moneymaker. Carrying is one thing. When it comes to brands, I would argue Carolina basketball and Duke basketball are just as big of brands as Clemson football, if not bigger.
yeah, but I mean, in terms of
And the other domino that the ACC has, the other ace they potentially have up their sleeve is Notre Dame. And I don't see Notre Dame if the super conference thing happened, if they get a few more teams on board. I don't think it would be Ohio State and Michigan. I don't think it'll be any Big Ten teams, but if they got a few more teams on board and then they reached out to Notre Dame, I do not see a world where Notre Dame joins the super conference. I don't see the world where Notre Dame joins any conference.
yeah, I don't quite see your point about how Duke and UNC being big brands would keep Clemson from leaving, for example.
I mean, but you said they were carrying it. I don't necessarily
I mean, carrying
agree
it in
that
football
they're
terms. Florida State's not.
yeah, Florida State's not.
Florida State has been the clear biggest name. Florida State, Miami, and Clemson have been the three teams who are the big names in football in the last couple decades. I mean, Virginia Tech has been all right here and there. Georgia Tech's been all right here and there, but
when
it's
you
really
talk
those
about
three
carrying a conference, Texas and Oklahoma just as brands, that's yes, there's Kansas basketball, and yes, Baylor won a national championship in basketball, but Texas and Oklahoma are legitimate collegiate athletic powerhouses in about every sport they play.
That's true.
That's a different thing.
They are dominant in everything.
Clemson is really just dominant in football. Florida State has a few sports they're good at across the board, but they're the one everybody thinks of is football. North Carolina, Duke, basketball. But to your point, I do think there is a world where I could, I guess, theoretically see Clemson joining up something like this. If it was good for Clemson, I could see Florida State doing it. I could see Miami doing it. I don't see Ohio State or Michigan doing this.
I don't either.
I don't see USC doing it. I don't see Notre Dame doing it. I don't see Penn State doing it.
Yeah, and I mean, because you talk about the Big Ten, there is just so much tradition in the Big Ten. And also, I mean, not that geography is the most important thing in these matters. Obviously, money has a big impact. But, I mean, teams from Ohio and Michigan going to the Southeastern Conference, if they rebranded the name to the Super Conference or the Mega Conference or the American Elite Conference or whatever, then I guess it'd make more sense. But yeah, I also struggle with understanding why a team like Ohio State would want to join this Super SEC when they know, of course, it's not a guarantee they're going to win the Big Ten every year, but they've won the Big Ten the last 4 years. Mm-hmm. They're doing just fine in the Big Ten, both in terms of money and athletic success and also academic success. They're a terrific university and a terrific conference. So I feel like Ohio State really has no reason to leave. Whereas you look at Texas and Oklahoma, you think maybe they're already huge brands. Obviously, they're some of the biggest brands in college athletics and just as universities in the United States as a whole. But I could see people saying that they would flourish even more in the SEC. And obviously, there's better competition and that would help with recruits and everything. I just don't quite see what Ohio State's incentive to leave is. They're in a great conference right now. They're in the in a football standpoint, they're in the second best conference in the United States. And I'm not going to argue whether the Big Ten stands in comparison to other conferences and other aspects, whether that be sports or academics. But in football, they're in the second best conference, which they win consistently. And if they don't win, they're always near the top. They already get the best recruits. They already compete really well with schools like Alabama and Georgia and Oklahoma for recruits, and they win those recruiting battles often. As a team in Ohio, they live in a great recruiting hotbed. There's really no reason why Ohio State would want to leave. And same with Michigan, because first of all, I don't think Michigan would fare very well in the SEC in terms of football. I think they would get beaten pretty often just because, the talent gap in college football is growing. And right now, Michigan's not in a spot where they need to be. But Michigan is also doing terrific in terms of academics and athletics across the board in the Big Ten as well. You look at any of their sports programs, they're always near the top. Basketball, Michigan is constantly competing for national championships. Hockey, I believe they just had, I forget the exact number, but I believe they had 4 top 10 NHL draft picks. You look at baseball, they were in the national championship 2 years ago against Vanderbilt. Michigan's doing just fine as well. They don't need the SEC to succeed. And I think that's the difference between Texas and Oklahoma. You can throw these rumors around about Ohio State and Michigan joining this SEC super conference, but I just don't see why they would ever need to leave the Big Ten.
Now, here's a little bit of breaking news, and it confirms a lot of what we've already said. So an hour ago, Dan Wetzel from Yahoo, who broke a lot of stuff. I know at the very least, he reported a lot of stuff about the FBI investigations into like the shoe companies in the NCAA and in basketball. I remember he had some stuff on like Dennis Smith. I think he had some of the stuff on DeAndre Ayton. Maybe I could be wrong on that, but I know he investigated that. So he's a very reliable source in collegiate athletics. So here's what he said in his tweet. As discussed on podcast, hearing little to no interest in expansion from Big Ten sources. No need to make a move. There is talk of a scheduling agreement with the Pac-12, rotation of non-conference games, and no, Ohio State and Michigan are not leaving. So it confirms that Ohio State and Michigan aren't going anywhere. I didn't buy that in the first place, but we did have to talk about it just because how could we not? How could we ignore that? But what it does bring up is something I was going to bring up anyway. When we started this, I wanted to talk about how there were some people talking about how the Pac-12 is going to fold. Like the Big 12 looks like it's all but about to fold. And I'm sure you've all heard a lot about that. But people are saying, oh, the Pac-12 is next. I mean, not necessarily. The Pac-12 just hired a new commissioner. I think they're mostly doing fine. It's not like the Big 12. We all kind of knew this was coming from the Big 12 because of some decisions they've made as a conference. But the Pac-12, I don't think anything is imminent with them. So the Big 10 and the Pac-12 obviously have a lot of history. It goes back to the Rose Bowl, and a lot of academic tradition and stuff like that. My working thought was, and this was something that was actually proposed back when the Big 10 had 12 teams before they expanded to 14. And I read somewhere that this was a thing that was going to happen, but it didn't, was similar to, if you're familiar with the Big 10 ACC Challenge in basketball, where every year one Big 10 school plays a different ACC school. And they kind of rotate, like, oh, Michigan State's playing Duke, or Purdue is playing North Carolina State, Indiana's playing North Carolina, whatever. And they kind of do that. There was going to be an idea kind of like that, almost a Pac-12 Big 10 challenge in football. And this is an idea I love. Rotating opponents every year, getting to see new teams you don't see too often from a different part of the country, maybe some cool opportunities to travel to new stadiums, new locations, recruit in different places. I love this idea for a partnership in scheduling between the Pac-12 and the Big 10. I think it strengthens both conferences. It gives both conferences opportunities for marquee wins, and it's just fun from a football perspective. So those are just really the aspects of that little news break that I wanted to get into. So the Big 10 is not going to expand, which was something we were going to talk about, was potential Big 10 expansion. It kind of sounds like that's not going to happen, but we can still talk about it anyway, what Big 10 expansion would look like if it were to theoretically happen, because I mean, there's a chance that some of this Texas, Oklahoma stuff doesn't happen for another 4 years. And in collegiate athletics time, 4 years is a long, long time. 4 years ago, I mean, we were dealing with, again, like I talked about, the shoe companies getting cracked down on by the FBI and the NCAA in college basketball recruiting. And now college athletes can be paid 3-4 years later. So it's funny how times change, but it's entirely possible that 3 or 4 years from now, the Big 10 is going to say, you know what, we do need to expand. And then what are they going to do? Who are they going to be looking at? What's that going to look like? So we can't talk about that, but Ohio State and Michigan are staying put. That's the important thing. And a Big 10 Pac-12 scheduling agreement in football would be pretty cool if you ask me.
I love the Big 10 Pac-12 challenge. Fantastic idea. I love the idea of, because right now we have a little mini version of that right now with Ohio State playing Oregon, Michigan playing Washington. I love the idea of the number one team from one league playing the number one from the other, just like the Big 10 ACC challenge.
Totally.
I love.
Oh yeah, and then you kind of drip this down a little bit. You make like Indiana, USC. We get Purdue, Oregon State, which I think would more or less line up. That's another game we're getting this year. You know, I think you could get some really cool matchups out of this and some cool locations, some cool travels. Everybody gets an opportunity to play UCLA in the Rose Bowl at some point.
Exactly. Everybody loves because first of all, who doesn't want to go on vacation in California? That's a terrific opportunity for fans of Indiana, Minnesota, whatever, to go out to LA, go out to Northern California to see Stanford, or even
Seattle.
Even Oregon. Oregon's a cool place. Like, I don't know. The Pac-12, I love
Seattle's
Pac-12.
awesome.
And I would love to go to some away games out there. And I know a lot of teams would love to bring their fans there.
Remember, Ohio State in like 2012 played at Cal and had a gigantic crowd.
I mean, that's going to happen at
But
any.
that's Ohio State. But at the same time, it's like there were definitely a lot of Ohioans who were like, yeah, I'd love to go to California for a game. That sounds fun. So I definitely think you would get like decent travel too. And I think for some of the West Coast fans, because maybe the Big Ten doesn't have destination cities like Los Angeles, like or places like California and Seattle, Arizona as like vacation places. But what it does have is really unique and lovable college towns, awesome atmospheres, and
Iconic football venues. Who doesn't want to go see a game at Beaver Stadium?
Great
tradition.
Come on. Yeah, Michigan, Ohio State, Wisconsin, Penn State, like you name it. You go
Nebraska,
up and down the list.
A pretty iconic stadium as well.
Absolutely, you go up and down the list. I think this makes way too much sense, and I hope this comes into fruition. And we can talk about scheduling too. I think that's another aspect because I know we've gone all over the place already on this podcast, but conference realignment is such a broad topic, and it brings to light so many other subtopics. And one of them is scheduling. Like, you would have to find room in the schedules to fit in a Big Ten Pac-12 challenge or challenge-like event. I don't know what a scheduling agreement would look like, but I would assume it'd be something like that, where every Big Ten team, to an extent, because it's 14-12 right now, Big Ten versus Pac-12 teams, plays a Pac-12 team every year. I know you would want to try and do that, but you would have to get creative with scheduling, maybe cut a conference game, maybe get rid of divisions, go to pods or nothing, and just kind of do protected rivals and random games in terms of conference schedule. And then you get your maybe go to an 8-game conference schedule and then have your Pac-12 game, and then you get your 3 non-conference games.
You know what else I love about the Big Ten Pac-12 challenge is the idea that it's going to be super helpful for the playoff. And now that the playoff is likely going to become more than 4 teams in the future, it'll help for seeding in the playoff, because in the past, if you're in Ohio State, you go undefeated or you have 1 loss or something, but your out of conference schedule is just a bunch of MAC teams, then yeah, you're not going to be super well respected when you have teams like maybe if Clemson goes and beats Notre Dame or something. So you're guaranteed, if you're Ohio State and you're year in, year out one of the best teams, you're guaranteed a game against an Oregon, a Washington, a USC, or whichever team is hot that year. Like if ASU or UCLA, whatever, becomes good all of a sudden, you're guaranteed 1 high-profile game. And that's important. And you could get 2 out of conference high profile games if you decide to do that, and then go schedule Texas or Notre Dame or whatever.
And
that's huge.
And Ohio State's already doing that. Ohio State's already scheduling some of these big games. They're playing Notre Dame. They're playing Texas. They're playing Alabama in like 10 years.
I mean, that's that's huge though, to be able to say for certain you're going to play a Power 5 team in one of your out of conference games,
in a good
and if you're Ohio State or Penn State or Michigan, if you're at the top of the conference, you're going to play a big name from a Power 5 conference.
I mean, no, that's big, especially
look at basketball, right? Mm-hmm. Ohio State every year they participate in the CBS Sports Challenge, so they get one of UCLA, Kentucky, or
Carolina.
Yeah, or Carolina.
Can I tell you something about that event? They're only in it because Indiana turned it down.
Hey, they're in it, and it helps boost their resume. And now, of course, with the Big Ten ACC Challenge, Ohio State is guaranteed 2 likely, every now and then UNC or Kentucky or whatever will have an off year, but most likely Ohio State's going to be playing 2 top 25 teams in their out of conference games a year, where if they weren't in those competitions, maybe that wouldn't be the case. That's huge for football as well, to get the Big Ten, because oftentimes you have people, if there's the idea of the SEC being better than the Big Ten in football or whatever, or the Big 12, if we're comparing conferences, being able to point to, hey, teams from our conference went and played the best from another conference, and we won most of the time. You won't have to wait until bowl season to see how your conference stacks up against another. I think it's a brilliant idea. I love the idea of conferences playing one another. There was talk, and this was never really, I don't think there was talk of this ever actually happening. This was more fan speculation of, wouldn't it be awesome to see this? But there was talk of a Big Ten SEC challenge, which would be terrific, or even a Big Ten ACC challenge in football. I don't know why why is that a thing in basketball but not football, honestly?
Because the ACC is very good at basketball and just kind of okay at football.
That's true. But
But this is
I
also
love this idea.
this is huge for the Pac-12 because if this were to come into fruition, the Pac-12 right now has a reputation of being the weakest of the power conferences, and
And they've earned that reputation. Let's be fair. It's not that they've just given
no,
this.
you're right.
They have fully earned it.
You're right, but they kind of have a played when a Big 12 or a Pac-12 team does anything when they get into the top 5, top 10, whatever. Sometimes they get a played nobody kind of reputation, like they say they ain't played nobody. But then suddenly Oregon, they're 8-1, let's say in November, and they're a prospective playoff team, but a 12-team playoff they'd probably get in regardless. But for seeding purposes, maybe they want to try and get the bye. You look at their schedule and it's like, yeah, they did lose that game at Arizona State, but they beat Penn State, which that's huge, or something like that. It's like
Exactly.
that's an
Or,
extra
the
big
Pac-12
win.
in recent years, they've had teams like back when Mike Leach was at Washington State, they had some really solid Washington State teams. Utah that one year, they pushed for the playoff. They ended up choking in the last 2 weeks, but they were a pretty solid team nationally. And they've had teams like this year in, year out that kind of pop up. And I got a feeling Arizona State and or UCLA are going to be that team this year. So you look at those teams, typically that Pac-12 team, they'll have a great season, but they're not really super nationally respected because maybe they lost a game to a worse team in the Pac-12, or maybe they just don't have an impressive win on their schedule. They didn't get scheduled against Oregon that year or something. So being able to say, hey, we beat Nebraska away, or I guess Nebraska's not that good this year, but we beat Indiana away, and Indiana's great season. Or we beat Penn State away, or we beat Michigan at home. That's huge. If you're a team who's got one or two losses and you're fighting for that playoff spot, to be able to say, hey, we had a good win against this out of conference team who's well respected, who may also be in the playoff. Great for both the Big Ten and the Pac-12, and it's gonna be. I think it would be a great mutual partnership.
Yeah, instead of going and making your own super conference, I don't like super conferences. I'm going to be quite honest. I don't like it. I think it's disrespectful to the history of the sport. I think it tarnishes the integrity of college football as a regional game, and it destroys rivalries. It hurts education. Really, it'll hurt a lot of Big 12 schools. This is not going to be good for Oklahoma State. Just as one example, or Kansas State or whoever, for this to happen. But if you're the Big Ten, you could go and make your own super conference and try and poach half the Pac-12 and become a national conference. But why not just do a little bit of something like this? Say we're the Big Ten. We're going to be good no matter what. We're always going to be strong. Say, here's what we're going to do. It sounds really simple, but I think it's effective. It's, instead of, I don't think it's all about the money. This is just so much more respectful to the integrity of our sport. That's what I'm trying to get at here, and I'm not saying it too articulately, but super conferences hurt college football. It it just makes me sad. It really does, because when you take all the teams and you start hurting the mid-level teams and the teams who, like Oklahoma State is going to be left out to dry probably in this. Oklahoma State 10 years ago almost won the championship. And
And they've been
Oklahoma State,
solid for the entire decade. They've been a
uh-huh.
force to be reckoned with for a while.
Oklahoma State in the zombie Big 12 or in the American or even in the Pac 12 isn't the same as they were when they had a chance to beat Oklahoma or Texas every year. It just isn't. And it hurts that university. If it hurts the academics, if it hurts the athletics, it's going to end up hurting the academics, which is, I guess, something you always have to look at. But this is going to hurt those football teams. They're not going to have a chance. And we thought the 12-team playoff era would be the one where everybody's got a shot. Everybody truly has a shot. But if they go ahead and keep trying to expand the SEC to a point where it's 25 teams and it's gigantic and every major football team in the South is a part of it, then suddenly nobody's got a shot, and it'll leave the AAC out to dry and all these different things. I don't know what's going to happen with the Big 12. I know the Big 10, it sounds like it's not going to expand. I know there was talks about the Big 10 looking at Kansas, which I think would have been a cool move for basketball, but for football, it would have been abysmal. They do make sense academically, geography, and in terms of geography, but I don't know if Kansas would have been a good fit just because of how abysmal their football team is. But it sounds like the Big Ten's not going to expand, according to this report at least, which I trust a lot more than unverified sources at Barstool. No, I I think for the sport, we need the Big 12. We need the Big 12. And it sucks that we're not going to have the Big 12, at least in the same way. Uh, and I know the Big 12 is always the most likely conference to fail, and it is failing because Texas and Oklahoma are dipping. But it just isn't going to be the same without them. The autonomous four isn't going to be quite the same as the Power Five, you know. Uh, and maybe the Big 12 sticks around, and it's a zombie Big 12 where they added BYU and Cincinnati and UCF and Boise, and it's kind of the same, but they don't have a Texas or Oklahoma to anchor it, and it just isn't the same. But I think that's all my thoughts on the Big 12 and SEC. One thing I really do want to look at, though, is Big Ten scheduling and division realignment. Because while the Big Ten probably isn't going to expand, and I suppose it could expand, things could change, and we can talk about that if you want. One thing I do think is going to change 100%, like if I had to put money on it, I would put a lot of money on this happening, is the Big Ten is going to change their scheduling practices. And right now what we have is the Big Ten East and the Big Ten West. You play your entire division every year, and then you play 9 conference games. You play 6 against your division and 3 against the other division. And the only protected, and then everybody I think has a protected cross-divisional rivalry, right? Not a rivalry. The only rivalry is Purdue, Indiana in those cross-divisional games, but everybody has a protected game that they play every year. I think that is going to change in the 12-team playoff era.
Yeah, I'd like to see that. Because the whole idea of having your 6 divisional games and 3 non-divisional, and the 1 protected, other than Purdue, Indiana, it doesn't make any sense. You know why? And we've talked about this before. We've touched on this. Why Rutgers has to play Illinois every year? Why Minnesota has to play Maryland every year? Some of these matchups, they just don't make much sense. So getting rid of divisions makes sense for me. And we've talked about this, and we've talked about this off the air, on the phone, so many times, that our sort of ideal Big Ten scheduling template would be you have 2 protected rivalry games. So for Ohio State, obviously that'd be Michigan and Penn State. And for Michigan, that would probably be Ohio State and Michigan State. And then Penn State would be Ohio State and Michigan State. Sorry if that was kind of confusing, because I did say a lot of the same names in close proximity of one another in the same sentence. But you would still have your Indiana Purdue games. You'd still have your Illinois and Northwesterns and your Minnesota Wisconsin games. You would still have those, but at the same time, there's no reason Ohio State has to be playing Maryland every year. Mm-hmm. And I think that would also be huge for teams like Maryland, Illinois, Rutgers to go to the Big Ten championship. I mean,
I think it's even bigger. Let's say this is huge for the lower. This is huge for the Big Ten.
Huge for Indiana.
This is huge for everybody in the Big Ten East, not named Ohio State, because as we all know, Ohio State has had, at the beginning of the season, you can put their name in Sharpie as Big Ten East champs. And honestly, I don't think that's a whole lot different this season. Maybe Indiana pulls off the upset, maybe not. But you can kind of just pencil them in. That's not the case. If you got rid of divisions and you just said 2 best teams go to the Big Ten championship, suddenly there were a lot of years where last year Indiana was the second best team in the Big Ten. Year before that, I think I believe Penn State was ranked higher than Wisconsin was going into the conference championship game. I could be wrong, though. But there are a lot of years where a Michigan or a Penn State or an Indiana or an MSU is the second highest ranked, or even in Ohio State, it's the second best team in the Big Ten, and they don't get a chance to play for the Big Ten title. That doesn't seem fair to me. And the Big 12, I think, was right in not having divisions and just saying 2 best teams play for the title. Go for it. I think that would be huge for the rest of the Big Ten East. And it would also give the rest of the Big Ten East an opportunity to go to the Rose Bowl, because what the Big Ten likes to do is they give the conference runner-up. If the conference champ is not a Rose Bowl team, if they're a playoff team, they usually will give the conference runner-up the Rose Bowl bid. Even if there's a team in the East that's more deserving of it, they usually just give it to the conference runner-up. So if you get rid of that, then I feel like – but then there's the whole issue of the expanded playoff. Is the Rose Bowl going to be a part of it? Maybe this doesn't matter, but if the Rose Bowl were to not be a part of the playoff, maybe it could be better for teams like that. If the Big Ten, for some reason, only sent 1 bid, I don't know. Maybe I'm crazy, but I just want to see more different teams in the Rose Bowl. That's what I'm trying to get at here. I think it's better for that, because as Big Ten fans, the Rose Bowl really does matter to us. So seeing as many teams get an opportunity to go to it as possible, I think is huge. But that's just my opinion. So one thing I do have a strong preference for is uh, my scheduling idea. So what I would do is number one, dump divisions. Number two, every team gets 2 protected rivals. And I think you got at this earlier a little bit, but 2 protected rivals is plenty. Yes, there are some teams that have more than 2 rivals, but
And let me interrupt you. I do believe this is the system, or at least this is very similar to the system they used to use in like the early 2000s or so. I believe they used to have 2 protected rivals. And I do believe, or maybe it was 3, but I know that they used to have a system similar to this where Ohio State would play Michigan and Penn State every year. So yeah, continue. But yeah,
so
for all the older Big Ten fans who have been around for longer than we have, if this sounds familiar to you, we're not trying to make ourselves seem like geniuses.
We're not super geniuses.
Plagiarizing the old system.
This isn't a genius idea. This is pretty obvious if you ask me. It's pretty. I mean, it just makes sense. Like most teams have about 2 rivalries that they want to keep playing every year. Some have more. Like I think Iowa's got like 3. They've got Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Nebraska that they'd probably like to play every year. But you know what? Some of them, I guess, you just have to sacrifice. And some of them have less. Like Indiana's only real rival. Let's be for real. Is Purdue. I guess Michigan State technically, but not really. So some of them have more, some of them have less. But for the most part, every team has about 2 games they'd like to play every year, or 2 games that would at least make sense to be played every single year. And the rest can rotate. It doesn't, like you said earlier, it doesn't make any more sense for Ohio State to play Maryland every year than it does for Ohio State to play, for example, Iowa every year, other than the fact that they're marginally closer geographically. Like we have planes. It doesn't really matter. So I think getting rid of divisions, and that also allows for more diversity in scheduling. You get to see more teams, go to more stadiums. Like I was talking to actually at Big Ten Media Days, which I can talk about in another podcast, which I was at. I was talking to Minnesota's radio announcer, and he said like they've only been to Bloomington once in the last like decade for football. I think more or less. I forget the exact figure he gave me, but it had been a long time since they played a game in Bloomington. They're coming this year, but like some of these things, they just don't happen. I don't remember the last time Illinois played a football game in Bloomington, just for example. But changing it so you're not playing just your division every year and getting rid of divisions entirely, that means you get to see more teams. And I would also change the Big Ten schedule from 9 conference games to 8 conference games. And then I would add the Pac-12 Big Ten Challenge, which is an idea I adore. I think it would be great. And then you just keep your 3 other non-conference games. You can schedule whoever you want because a lot of those agreements are already, they already have contracts signed all the way into like the 2030s. Like Michigan's playing Notre Dame in like 2034. Indiana's playing Notre Dame in like 2030 and 2031. So
I'm sure OSU has Georgia in 2034, if I recall.
Yeah. So there's like what, 4-year-olds who are going to be playing in that game?
Yeah.
Yeah. So kids who are in diapers right now, we're going to be playing. I don't know if a 4-year-old would be in like diapers, but you know what I mean? Like they are not.
Kids who are learning to read, their games are already scheduled.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's like you could go to a preschool somewhere in Cincinnati or in Cleveland or in Austin, Texas, or Atlanta or wherever, and you could find some little kid who's sitting on the teacher's lap, trying to pay attention to a picture book, and say, "Hey, little guy, did you know in 2034 you're going to be suiting up in the shoe when Ohio State takes on Georgia?" And the kid couldn't tell you what any of those words mean. So, that's an issue with college football scheduling. We'll have to get at another day, but so many of those agreements are in place that I think you kind of have to honor them. So 8 conference games, your 1 Pac-12 game, and then the 3 other non-conference games, most of which have already been signed because that's how college football scheduling works. That is my ideal schedule. I think it would be great. I think it would be interesting. It would be lively. It would be fresh every single year. You wouldn't get sick of playing, we play Maryland every year. We play MSU every year. We play this and that every single year.
And that would be great for you as an Indiana fan to not have to play Ohio State every year. Imagine
that's another thing, is that it makes it more even for the Big Ten East teams, because right now Rutgers
and Nebraska
and Maryland,
as well, because I know Nebraska loves to talk about how they play Ohio State every year. They would love that. That's a different issue.
Yes. But for Indiana and Rutgers and MSU and I guess Penn State, depending on if I guess I'd probably get protected, but in Maryland and all them, not playing Ohio State every year, not playing Michigan, or maybe not playing Indiana, whoever, definitely good. And sometimes you would get the luck of the draw with your schedule, and it just lines up perfectly to where, you get Illinois, Purdue, Northwestern, and Nebraska or something. You get a Big Ten West schedule, and it's awesome. And I don't know. Maybe that's just me, the scarred watcher of Indiana Hoosiers football, who has spent many years wishing that we could play a West schedule instead of an East schedule, and all that. Like, I'm a firm believer that a lot of those mid 2010s Indiana teams, the West win like 8-9 games versus being in the East where they lose to Penn State, Michigan, and OSU and Michigan State pretty much automatically. Yeah, I think it evens it out. I think it really evens out competition. And that's why I am totally in favor of this proposal. Put a stamp on it. Kevin Warren, call me if you have any other ideas. Barry Alvarez, call me if you have any other ideas. Everybody else in the Big Ten football offices, hit me up. I've got ideas. The 1st and 10, fixing college football since 2019.
I would love for the two of us to have some sort of executive position in college football. I think the game would be.
I met Barry Alvarez at media days. Very nice guy. Coach Alvarez was awesome. One of the nicest people I've ever had the pleasure of interacting with. So shout out to him. But he just got his cushy executive role in the Big Ten football offices. Maybe there's something that works for us.
Yeah. But one thing I wanted to talk about with because we were talking about the idea of the Big 12 folding, which I really hope it doesn't, and I think they could save themselves.
Even a zombified Big 12 with I think BYU is the first call you make, number one. But
I think BYU is one call you got to make. Boise State's another big one. Another one I think would be great is SMU. They used to be in the Southwestern Conference. They were a big name. Obviously, they had the whole death penalty thing, and
lots of money.
Yeah, their name doesn't mean quite as much, but it's still a big name in college football. It's one of the bigger Group of 5 teams. Plus, TCU made the jump from Group of 5 to Power 5.
Automatic rivalries in the Metroplex with TCU, who they're already rivals with, and Baylor, who I think they could probably start something with over, Baptist, Methodist.
And I mean, the Big 12 conference, obviously there are teams outside of the Big 12, but it's almost just the Texas conference. So adding SMU would be huge for that. But yeah, BYU is a call you got to make. SMU is one. There's definitely some ways they can sort of salvage their conference. So I would love
UCF, USF. Basically, just take the leftover, take the good stuff from the American.
What they could also do, and I don't know that Arkansas and Missouri would be on board for this, and I feel like they probably wouldn't because there's a lot of money in the SEC. But they could try to get Arkansas, former member of the Southwest Conference. They could try to bring them in. They could try to get Missouri back, try to get Nebraska back. Again, I don't think Nebraska would do that because there's they have a lot good going for them in the Big Ten. But they could try and do that. But if the Big 12 were to fold, which would be a sad thing to see, and I hope it doesn't happen just for, I'm not a huge Big 12 guy, but I love the sport and it would be unfortunate. If that were to happen, I think the Big Ten would be a little bit foolish. And again, I want to preserve college football. I want it to stay the way it is. I don't want tons of expansion. I do think the Big 12 would be a little bit foolish not to jump on the idea of adding Iowa State to their conference. They're a member of the AAU. They've already got a long-standing rivalry with Iowa. Great tradition as a fan base. They've been in the Power 5 for a while. I don't see why Iowa State would not be a great addition to this conference. And obviously they haven't been terrific for a long time, but
what you have to worry about with that. What you have to worry about with that is Iowa blocking it. That's it. Like Iowa or Minnesota being like, we don't want another team right in our region stealing our recruits and all that. Like, I mean, they already kind of are stealing their recruits because Iowa State's recruiting well, but I don't know if they would okay that. I don't know if they would okay that.
I think that because we've had several conversations about this, how rivalries are so important in sports and how even though we hate our rivals, what would we do without them? And how Ohio State talks about this. Urban Meyer would always make this point, and Ryan Day has made it several times as well, that he hates Michigan, but he has a lot of respect for them. I think Iowa has a lot of respect for the Iowa State rivalry as well. And obviously it's possible they would block it, but I think that if the two options were bring Iowa State into your conference, make the rivalry even more intense, put even more at stake, as opposed to let Iowa State go off and maybe join a group of 5 conference, or who knows, really have their program decay. I think Iowa would have too much respect for that rivalry and what it means for this, for football in the state of Iowa to not do the most they can to bring them into the conference.
And that is not a respect that Oklahoma showed to Oklahoma State, for what it's worth.
Yeah, that was pretty. That was, yeah. I don't that move
I've seen
there.
statements from their university president who's like, "This is not a good move for the state of Oklahoma. This is not a good move for education in the state of Oklahoma. This is going to hurt the state." And in all honesty, for Oklahoma football, it's a great move, but for everything else, I just can't support it. Like, it can't end up good, especially for the other universities in that region, like Oklahoma State, for example. You can't help but feel bad for them that they're just kind of getting left in the dust, to no fault of their own, just from the greed of Texas and Oklahoma. And it sucks. It really does. And I hate that that's what sport has become, but it has. That there's schools like Texas and Oklahoma don't have any respect for tradition, and it's a shame.
And let me talk a little bit about why super conferences are bad and why regional conferences and college football, as it's been for a while, is something that's important. And I think obviously there's been expansion in college football before. We've had Missouri joining the SEC, that's pushing it. Rutgers, Maryland, Nebraska joining the Big Ten outside of the Midwest. That's pushing it a little bit, but the integrity of the Big Ten is still there. The integrity of the SEC is still there. Oklahoma in the Southeastern Conference it just doesn't make sense. It feels wrong, and it feels wrong for a reason. College football is so important to American.
By the way, I just thought of this. You said Southeastern Conference. Texas used to be in the Southwestern Conference, so even geographically, this doesn't make sense.
Yeah,
but I digress.
But I mean, college football is so important to American culture, and beyond just broad American culture, it's important to Midwestern culture, Southeastern culture. It's such an important thing for us as Americans to have college football. There's no other sport in this country where 100,000 people are going to a stadium week in, week out. There's a reason that college football is the only sport that has 100,000 seat stadiums in the world. There's only a select few stadiums on this earth that have as many seats as Ohio Stadium, Michigan Stadium, Tiger Stadium, Kyle Field, etc. There's a reason for that. College football is so important because there just aren't. Obviously, there's teams like the Green Bay Packers and the New England Patriots, the Dallas Cowboys, who have enormous fan bases, but there's just fewer sports where your team means as much to an entire state or entire communities of people as the name Alabama does to people from Alabama, or Ohio State does to people from Ohio. It's just so important to preserve this game we have because it means so much to the people, and it's just ingrained in American culture. And another thing is, super conferences, they tear this down a little bit, but also for the big names like Ohio State, Alabama, it's important to run the table in your conference, in your region. It's important to Ohioans and for Ohio State to be the best team in the Midwest. It's important for Alabama to be the best team in the Southeast. It's important to teams like USC to be the best in the West. And when you start taking away games like, when we're no longer playing games at Illinois or at South Carolina or taking the trip up to Vandy, it just means less. There's the phrase, the SEC loves the phrase, it just means more. But when you take away, and I guess they're not kicking Vandy out of the conference or anything, but when we get into the idea of creating a super conference where it's only the best teams and it's only the biggest brands, it's only the Oklahomas, Clemsons, Ohio State, Texas, Alabama, Notre Dame, etc., we're taking away the road trip to Minnesota or the trip up to Ryan Field in Evanston. It means less when we take away the things we take for granted, really, in college football. So when we think about removing games against smaller teams, it means less when you're, would you rather be the number 3 team in the super conference or the number 1 team in an entire geographical region? I would take being the number 1 team in your entire geographical region. So it just pains me to think, and I'm super happy that Ohio State and Michigan have said they're not going anywhere, and that the Big Ten is saying that they're staying the same. But just the idea of a super conference scares me, and it
Well,
scares
I
me
don't know. Did
that
Ohio
the
State and
sport I
Michigan actually
love.
say this, or is this just a report? Hold up.
This is the report you
This
said
is, yeah,
earlier.
this is the report. Yeah, the
Yeah.
universities didn't say anything, but I mean the universities
No,
never
but
acknowledged any of this. But
yeah,
just for clarification, this is a report. All of this is reportedly. This is none of this is official.
yeah.
Continue.
But I'm just saying, yeah, I'm so glad that reportedly Ohio State and Michigan are not going anywhere. And I'm so glad that
Me too.
reportedly the integrity of the Big Ten means more to them than the money they might make from the super conference. Because I mean, we already have a super conference of sorts. Like the college football playoff, that's
Agreed.
enough of. We already have enough national football. We need
Mhm.
to have regional and national football. We already get to play. We already get to see matchups between Ohio State and Clemson, Ohio State and Alabama,
Mhm.
Oklahoma and like we already get these games. We don't
They
need to be
schedule them, and they schedule them
forcing
in
more down our
non-conference
throat.
too. And they schedule them in non-conference too. It's a
Yeah.
shame that in these super conferences, Texas ever going to play Texas Tech again? When do you think the next bedlam is going to be? And I know everybody's going to say,
Because and to your point about
Oklahoma's totally going to make it a priority to schedule Oklahoma State. Then why didn't Texas A&M make it a priority to schedule Texas? If these
why didn't Oklahoma and Nebraska make it a priority to schedule each other every year?
To do it
I
sooner
mean, they're playing
than
each other now,
a decade after Nebraska left the Big Ten.
Yeah.
Like it's a shame, and those are actual rivalries that we've seen more or less die, and that will continue to die as things like this happen, especially with Oklahoma and Texas. But I suppose this is great.
Penn State, Pitt too. Those teams are never in a conference together, but that's a shame. That's another rivalry. Great rivalry in the state of Pennsylvania that's gone. The idea of rivalries going off to the wayside, it's just
it's
sad.
a shame.
And I know I was rambling.
That's part of what makes the sport the sport.
I didn't really.
Oh, yeah. Pitt, West Virginia.
I was rambling a little bit earlier with my point about American. Yeah.
You're absolutely right. Yeah.
And there were a lot of ums, and a lot of pauses when I was talking about my points about Midwestern, Southeastern, all that, and just the culture of sports. But I mean, there's no sport, at least in America, where the fans have as much passion as they do for college football.
Mm-hmm.
And rivalries are what drive passion for sport. Texas Tech, I mean, their team has been, I'm sorry if there's any Texas Tech fans in here, their team has been pretty awful for the past 5 years to 10 years. But they consistently have over 50,000 people in their stadium to go watch. And it's because the game means a lot to them. And when you take away Texas, Texas fans love to laugh about how every team in Texas hates them and they have 10, 15 schools who call them the rival or whatever. But if you take the Texas game, if the Texas game is out of the picture, then all of a sudden it just means a little bit less. And that's not to say nobody's going to show up to any Texas Tech game from now on, but that's a great example of it.
But then
the idea of Baylor, TCU, Texas Tech, all these teams never playing Texas again. Rivalries are what drive passion for sports. And when we take away some of those rivalries and we take away a reason to have passion, it's just sad because college football is the sport in America, in my opinion. NFL is a big deal. NBA is a big deal, all that. But college football is the biggest sport in terms of passion for your team, in terms of how much your team means to you. People look at the fans for soccer in England and soccer in Europe. Your club is part of your lifestyle. That's the same way. This is our version of that. Your college football team, if you're a serious fan, obviously there's casual fans and all that, but if you're a serious college football fan, your team means more to you than any other team. And like I said, there's a reason why there's no other stadiums in the United States that are as big as venues like Ohio Stadium, Beaver Stadium, Michigan Stadium, Tiger Stadium, Rose Bowl, etc. There is a reason.
Beyond for a lot of people being the place that educated them, your college football team is a part of you, and it's a part of you that's never going to change. And a big part of that part, a subset of that, is the rivalries and the passion and the tradition. And seeing a lot of that go by the wayside, it's wrong. It's wrong, and it disrespects the integrity and the tradition of the sport. And it breaks my heart that place.
Yeah, because Oklahoma State fans, and I don't know any Oklahoma State fans. I'm not an Oklahoma State fan, so I'm not speaking from personal experience. But I know that Oklahoma State fans every year, the Oklahoma game is the game they look forward to.
Even if
just like Ohio State fans with Michigan. Can you imagine Ohio State not playing Michigan, and I'm not saying that Bedlam holds the same weight as the game, but Bedlam's still a pretty damn big game. Can you imagine a world where Ohio State doesn't play Michigan every year? Can you imagine a world where UCLA and USC don't play every year? Can you imagine Auburn and Alabama not playing every year? Can you imagine Oklahoma and Texas not playing every year? Imagine how it feels to be a fan of Oklahoma State, where in a few years, I mean, this Bedlam game this season may be the last one played for decades. Can you imagine how that's going to feel to have that rivalry taken out of their hands? And obviously, it's possible for them to play each other out of conference. There are out of conference rivalries that happen every year, like Georgia Tech, Clemson, South Carolina, etc. But there's also a very real possibility that Oklahoma says, Big 12, it's in the past. It's old news. We're moving on to bigger and better things in the SEC. We don't need to play you anymore. Can you imagine being an Oklahoma State fan and having that taken away from you? My heart goes out to every fan of the lesser OSU.
Well, the second OSU of three. No, you hit the nail on the head, Reid. I couldn't agree with you more. I don't have a whole lot more to say about this whole matter other than I hope the best thing happens for college football. And I don't know what the best thing is at this moment. I think the best thing is as few of these super conferences happening as possible and matters to combat them being taken, and as much tradition and history of the sport being preserved as possible, because that's part of what makes college football is the tradition and the things that we've been doing for hundreds of years. Sports 162
Patrick,
years long.
I know you and everyone listening to this podcast is familiar with the phrase, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And I think there are things in college football that are broken, the playoff system being the biggest one, and for a while, name, image, and likeness. And those are being sorted out. The conference model was never what was broken about college football.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there were problems to address in college football, but it was never the idea of the Big 12's existence or the Big 10's existence. The SEC's
there were always a few teams that I felt, they belong in this conference, whatever. But in my mind, those are just one-offs. And I know money talks, but we need a Big 12. We just need a Big 12. Like, without them, the sport isn't the same. And it hurts. It hurts the other 8 teams in the Big 12. The teams not named Texas and Oklahoma. And it might even hurt Texas. Not their pockets, but I think Texas, a team who could barely win 7-8 games most years in the Big 12 the last few years, you think they're going to do any well in the SEC West? Are you kidding? Like, they might be Arkansas.
And also, I mean, I imagine it might suck for their fans too. I've seen some Texas fans saying, yes, let's do it. You know, a lot of Texas fans are behind this, but I think they have been taking for granted these games. I think they might start to miss playing Baylor, playing Texas Tech, playing TCU,
playing Oklahoma State,
playing
K-State.
I think they're going to start missing this if this does come to fruition, which it looks like it will.
And even the punching bag games, it won't feel the same to them to beat up on Vandy as it will to beat up on Kansas.
Exactly. Because they've been doing it for years. I would hate for Ohio State to have to go kick the crap out of South Carolina every year as opposed to Maryland or Rutgers. And
you've only been playing Rutgers for 7 years.
Exactly.
And I guess the more apt picks would be who? Indiana, Northwestern, Purdue.
But we don't really play Northwestern every year. But yeah, Indiana. I mean, of course, we're not going to beat the crap out of Indiana every year now because Indiana, they gave us a run for our money last year. They're going to do it this year. But yeah, the idea of even like you said, even the punching bag games, having the logo on the helmet of your punching bag be different, it just won't feel the same. And I think Texas fans and Oklahoma fans, a lot of them might be behind the move now, but I think they're going to come to realize that soon enough.
Mm-hmm. No, and I've seen very few, and I saw even a few Ohio State fans who were like, very few, like 2 or 3, who were like, we should do this. This is better. This is going to be good for Ohio State. I don't think this is going to be good for any school who's participating in this, to be quite honest here. I think it's going to tarnish their reputation and their brand a lot. I think this tarnishes my opinion of Oklahoma and of Texas. This does not make me think highly of them. So from a reputation standpoint, there's that. From a competitive standpoint, Oklahoma's kind of cakewalked through the Big 12 most years, recently.
They've won the Big 12 each of, I believe, the past 6 years.
Yeah, and it's not been
it's working out well for them.
It's not been too close. Like, I don't see that's not going to happen in the SEC when they have to deal with Bama and Georgia and Florida and LSU, and if Tennessee gets their act together, which won't happen. But and then there are more teams in the SEC than there are in the Big 12 who can muck up a perfect season. I mean, last year nobody expected Oklahoma to lose to K State or to Iowa State. Imagine them going up against a Lane Kiffin team every year and Ole Miss, or against a perpetual upset team. Like, it feels like South Carolina pulls off some random upset every year, even if they're not good enough to. Arkansas is better than K State right now. Arkansas is better. I mean, you do the math. This is just from a football standpoint, from a money standpoint, this is obviously the right move. From a football standpoint, I just don't know if this is. I don't think Oklahoma is going to be the dominant team they were in the Big 12 and the SEC, and I don't know if this is good for. I don't think Texas is not in a place right now where they want a step up in competition. That is asinine to think Texas is going to say, you know what, let's go to a harder conference, because they can't even win their mediocre conference they're in right now. Simple as that. I don't care how much money Texas makes. I don't care how big of a brand Texas is. I don't care that it's Texas. Texas hasn't won the Big 12 in what? Decade plus? Like 2009, I believe, was the last time they won the Big 12. Come on. Like, you're going to tell me you're going to go compete in the SEC. All right. Good luck with that. And you know what? That'll do it for our show today. Reid, thanks for being a part of our little rant session here about the future of college football. Because
Sometimes we need rant sessions. Sometimes we need
do.
to let it all out and talk about how much we love
Yes.
our game. And I also recommend part of what inspired, I mean, obviously the breaking news and the developing story inspired us to do this episode, but I recommend all of you go and watch the some Big Ten commercials, the Big Ten Maps commercial, the commercial where they're walking in the stadiums, all that, because as silly as it sounds, you see them all the time throughout the season. I haven't seen one since December when I was watching college football when it was in season. The nostalgia that brings back and the love for the Big Ten that really brings out. I recommend you all have that similar experience. Go to YouTube and watch some Big Ten commercials.
Yeah, good stuff. Sorry if this podcast is a little hard to follow. There is so much information to organize here. And we have a lot to say about all of it. And getting it all out in like an hour is kind of tough because there's a lot. And I think by listening to this, you understand. So thank you for listening. We really do appreciate every single one of you who follow us and listen to our show. We'll have more stuff in the coming weeks. Some of my recaps of Big Ten Media Days, some previews of the season, some top 25 discussion, some ranking stuff. And we're getting close to football. We can smell it. We're a month away. The season is almost here. We are so close. We are, I think, just about exactly a month away from kickoff between Illinois and Nebraska. Originally going to be in Ireland at Aviva Stadium, but instead it'll be in Champaign. We're about a month away. So I know Reid can't wait. I can't wait. This is going to be great. So no matter how we feel about the future of things and other conferences and maybe even in our own, we're excited about this season, no matter what. And we're going to have a regular, real college football season. And it's going to be great. And I couldn't be more excited. So thank you all for listening from the bottom of our hearts. Thank you for listening and have a good one.